Welcome to Reading the Bible Together and to the book of Genesis and our summary episode. It's been quite a ride, bringing us from the depth of winter in January to the brink of summer here in June. And we encountered lots of things in Genesis that we knew were there, but lots we didn't expect and somehow missed whenever we read it before. But there it is, challenging our preconceptions and expectations and opening up an entire world for us to consider. And it began, of course, with God and with the creation of the world, the heavens, the earth, all that is in them, a procession of creation culminating in us, men and women together, given the task of caring for creation and for one another, our first and most basic and most necessary job. Chapter 2 presented yet another vision of creation, a more personal vision with the creation of man, Adam, from the dust of the ground, filled with life by the breath of God. A garden is made for Adam's home, and the animals are presented and named, but there's something missing. Eve, a partner for Adam, a helper, an etzer, not a word of subservience, but of mutual help and care. Paradise was complete. But part of that completeness was a choice to obey or to rebel, to choose God or to choose the self, to choose love or to reject love. For what is love if there is no choice? And the choice was made, not to obey God, to serve God, to love God, but to become like God, rivals in status and power. And with that choice came the end of paradise, childhood lost. We opened the gate and death came in. Life would be a struggle and would be lived by the sweat of the brow. Chapter 4 painted for us the consequences of the rebellion, nothing less than the murder of Abel by his brother Cain. Abel had presented God with his best, Cain with leftovers. And since it seemed as though Cain really didn't want to worship God through these gifts, God let him keep them. Well, as a result, jealousy and resentment arise in Cain's heart, and in a cold and premeditated act, he kills his brother. In defense, he asks, "Am I my brother's keeper?" "Yes, you are, Cain. Remember, that's the most basic command. Care for creation and for one another." Well, Cain flees the area, ashamed to face his parents, and as the camera pulls out for a wider angle shot, we're introduced to a bigger world populated beyond the Adam and Eve family, where Cain finds a wife, but where his descendants descend ever further into warlike ways. Well, chapter 5 lists the main players in the story, and in chapter 6 we're introduced to Noah and the flood, where we will be throughout the next 4 chapters. We discovered that there are 2 retellings of the Noah story, 2 complete accounts, which have been seamlessly woven together. Animals both 2 by 2 and 2 by 7, 40 days, 150 days, a dove and a raven sent out as scouts. But most importantly, we discover that even a thorough scrubbing of the earth does not solve the problem of sin. It resides in the human heart, even in the heart of poor old Noah. Well, no sooner is the ground dry than construction begins on the Tower of Babel. Man has not forgotten the temptation of the garden to be like God. So, let's build a tower that reaches to the heavens. We will employ all of our strength and wisdom and technology, and then we will be like God. Not surprisingly, confusion becomes the order of the day. All plans are thwarted, and humanity scatters. And one such scatterer, making his way from Ur of the Chaldees to Haran to Canaan, is Abram and his wife Sarai, the forerunners of the great patriarchs and matriarchs, and the founders of the Hebrew people and inheritors of the promised land. They're an unlikely pair, well past the age we would choose for such a task, and as we discovered on multiple occasions, capable of some pretty questionable decisions. We expected the patriarchs and the matriarchs, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Rachel and Leah, we expected them to be faultless paragons of virtue. But it turns out that's not what we got. which makes sense, I suppose, because that's not what we are either. Yet God worked his purpose through them and continues to do so through us, flawed though we unquestionably are. Oh, Ishmael and then Isaac are born, both as stepbrothers. They have their struggles, but time and again, surprisingly, they're brought together by the death of those they love, as is often the case in our families as well, even in families that don't get along. From Isaac and Rebekah come Jacob and Esau, two brothers who could not be more different and whose differences are multiplied by parents playing favorites. Well, the crafty Jacob ends up winning the birthright, very nearly losing his brother and his life in the process. But again, to our surprise, God, working in mysterious ways, passes the blessing on to Jacob, who proceeds to live a life of cunning and guile, and who encounters in his father-in-law Laban someone no stranger to cunning and guile himself. Which means 2 wives for Jacob, the bovine Leah and the beautiful Rachel. But God blesses Leah with sons while Rachel suffers alone until Joseph and finally, and tragically, Benjamin are born to her. And it is Joseph to whom our story turns. Again, no spotless hero, but an apparently arrogant twerp who revels in making life miserable for his 10 older brothers. Jacob, favoring Joseph and unwisely placing him in charge of the others, sows the seeds for discontent that will lead to hatred in the ranks. Far from the safety of home, his brothers hatch a plan to dispatch their brother, who ends up a slave in faraway Egypt, in the household of the mighty Potiphar, which also houses Potiphar's lusty wife, who houses in her heart a burning desire for the now influential head of household slave Joseph, who we are told flaunts both his power and his good looks, swinging his ankles in the marketplace. But soon, resisting the adulterous advances, Joseph finds himself cooling his heels in jail. A famous dreamer himself, he interprets the dreams of some temporarily incarcerated royal officials, which come wonderfully and tragically true. It takes a few years for the moment to pay off, but when it does, Joseph stands before Pharaoh, washed and cleaned, buffed and polished, and hears yet another dream, Pharaoh's dream. Carnivorous cows, predatory wheat. But Joseph's capacity has engendered maturity, and giving credit to God, Joseph reveals the meaning of these dreams. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, and you better find an insightful person to help you prepare. Well, who better than Joseph, who's put in charge, taxing the populace at 20% for 7 long years and securing vast storehouses of grain for the tough times ahead. And when famine hits, the people are able to buy it back, first with money, then with land, then with their servitude. Also lined up to buy is a small contingent from Canaan, also suffering famine. And this group is family, Joseph's family no less. 10 of his brothers all bowed down before him as in a dream. Benjamin, Dad's new fave, now that Joseph is gone, is back home, keeping the old man company. The brothers don't recognize Joseph. Let's face it, the years have passed, and standing before them is what seems to be an all-powerful Egyptian ruler, with a new Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah. And he's swathed in white linen. He's got bangles and bracelets of gold and a necklace of finely wrought turquoise and gold, a fancy hat covering his hairless head, and if Egyptian tomb paintings are anything to go by, mascara laid on thick. Small wonder they didn't know him. But he knew them all right. You don't forget a group of brothers who beat you, throw you into a pit, debate whether to leave you to die or sell you to slavers, and then return home telling your dear old dad that all that's left of you is a bloody robe and a lion somewhere with a full belly. So it's revenge time. And Joseph leads his brothers on a nerve-wracking and merry chase, testing them with plot after plot, and eventually ending up with the whole family gathered before him, 70 all told, everyone having learned their lesson, or so we hoped. Old Jacob even gets to meet the Pharaoh himself, who can't believe the sight of the ancient nomad standing before him, 130 years old. And rather than a word of thanks, all Jacob can do is complain. Surprise. But the Pharaoh generously grants the extended family land in Goshen to raise their flocks, and the covenant people are saved from the famine. But that salvation will come at a cost. It'll be many years and many Hebrews born before they return to the promised land as a nation to take possession of that long promised Canaan. Abraham and Sarah lay entombed back in Hebron, Isaac and Rebekah too. And Jacob extracts a promise that his bones will be returned there someday. And after this promise is fulfilled, Joseph too, at the age of 110, breathes his last, but not before forgiving his brothers and hearing their promise that he too will find rest in the promised land. And he will, but not for hundreds of years. The age of the patriarchs is over, and the age of the Exodus begins. All of that and much, much more in about 70 pages. But in these 70 pages is laid the foundation for the entire Bible itself, all the way to Jesus and to the healing of the wound of the garden and to the establishment of the new covenant for all people and to the healing and recreation of the world at the end of all things, which in itself will mark another beginning. I encourage you over the summer break to go through Genesis again and to fix it firmly in your mind. What did you remember? What did you forget? And speaking of forgetting, remember our Gospels and Acts videos are still there for you as well. What a great way to spend the summer, reacquainting yourself with them. And in the fall, as promised, we will resume where we left off and see how God fulfills the promise of the promised land, the promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, to Joseph and his brothers, and to you. We will see you then.